A retrial collapsed in 2018 and was stayed. The Privy Council ruled that it would be unconscionable to retry him now, though disciplinary or civil action could still be pursued. Internationally, as plastic waste nears 200 trillion pieces in the world's oceans, over 170 nations are meeting in Geneva to revive talks on a global treaty to curb plastic pollution. Despite a 2022 agreement to finalize a deal in 2 years, no consensus has been reached. Key issues include reducing single-use plastics and banning harmful chemicals. While nearly 100 countries support bold action, oil-producing nations remain opposed to cutting production, preferring a focus on recycling instead. Well, that's news on the hour on WESN. I'm Sean Michael Small. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
Welcome back. Some of you may have seen me having a interesting discussion, just barely scratched the surface really, on AM Prime with Jada. It's an interesting topic, interesting to me in how we differ from abroad. We are so connected and yet we're apart. And because of that, we have a unique culture. One of the things that I didn't say that we didn't have time was that I always found TNT to have done multiculturalism maybe better than a lot of other places. Because when I went to New York, granted, I didn't see the full extent of New York, right? It's not like I've walked every street and visited every community and seen all the various ways they've integrated or not. But I was struck by the fact that New York was highly segmented. Now, to be fair, to some extent we are segmented and yet we're not, right? I did say that there are certain communities, like certain parts of Cascade, St. Anne's, Glencoe, certain parts of Diego Martin, etc., where you have a big mix of socioeconomic, religious, racial, demographic situations, right? But at the same time, we don't. But I do find that integration comes easier for us. It's almost like, whereas in other parts of the world, if you're the lone person of whatever, particularly certain developed countries, if you're the lone example of whatever demographic you represent, and you're new to an area, or your demographic has never really been seen before in that area, whether it's race, religion, what have you, mainly race. It's almost like if they don't know what to do with you. But in TNT, and to be fair, certain other parts of the third world, that is to say, not Soviet Russia, not the first world countries, the G7, etc., but the rest of the world, third world was not necessarily meant as a disparaging economic remark when it was first created. Other countries outside of those areas tends to be embracive of new people. It's almost like if we welcome the new blood because we welcome the new ideas. We welcome the new perspective. We welcome to see, look how many people, because I enjoy it immensely. When I'm on YouTube and I see a video about Trinidad and Tobago, I want to see and hear what they say about us and experience us through their lens. Because when a foodie comes down from abroad and has our local food and says it's good, and in some cases, like Andrew Zimmerman says, it's the best, then, you know, it gives us perspective that, hey, compared to abroad, we're pretty good. Now, one of the things that's going on in abroad that's a little bit alarming, but it hasn't affected us yet. The United States in what might be the most aggressive immigration barrier or protection measure that I've ever seen. 2 countries from Southern Africa, Malawi and Zambia, and limited to those 2 countries, and I will add for now, I assume that it can be expanded. I don't know what necessarily are the criteria for determining who this applies to, but it's limited to these 2 countries. Their citizens visiting the US now have to post a $15,000 US bond when entering America, either for business or on tourist visas. And they get the bond back once they leave the country on the stated date. It will automatically be returned if the visa holder departs from the US on or before the date to which he or she is authorized to remain in the US. Does not travel to the US before the expiration of visa or applies for and is denied admission at the US ports of entry. So, $15,000 bond. Having the bond does not guarantee getting a visa, but you need it in order to travel. And I guess if you overstay your visa, you run the risk of not getting your money back. If you plan your trip to literally be the extent of the visa, and maybe something goes wrong with your flight and you have to go the following day, assuming you can get there is a flight the next day, you might lose out on $15,000 US if you're from these 2 countries. Now, initially I was like, is this happening to us? And I don't necessarily think it's a bridge too far for it to happen to us, because what happened in the UK, they put more stringent measures in order for us to travel to their country because of, to some extent, it was said a lot of people are applying for asylum, right, because of crime. But I do wonder if, for the most part, it's because they probably know we kind of took advantage of certain things. And also, the Caribbean community at times takes advantage of the United States with regards to traveling and never leaving. And this is one way to deal with it. Yeah, if you want to go to a foreign country and just, overstay your visa, well, first, you'll be out of considerable financial resources up front. And then second, you can probably still get deported anyway. It's not like because you give up the $15,000, you automatically get to stay. No, if they find you, then you're gone. And to come back, you need to find another $15,000 US again. It's a harsh measure. There's a part of me that wonders to what extent are we on the radar for this being considered to be applied to us, right? And I wonder what people will say about it. I think one business chamber is looking at AmCham. They have concern over it, but again, it doesn't apply to us just yet. And look, it's very limited in its scope. But I do wonder if this is one of those things where we'll apply it to maybe more extreme cases, I assume, right? Because they're limiting it to 2 countries, these 2 countries are potentially more extreme than, say, other situations that they might be considering. And yeah, to what extent, once it proves to work or disproves to work, then they'll maybe scrap it or modify it. But if it proves to work as is, will they widen the scope? And this is one of the things where now it puts certain other things into question, like the fact that the United States, I'm not saying that this is directly going to impact our diplomatic standing with the US, but I don't know if it helps. And that is to say that there's a whole situation with regards to Jack Warner and his extradition case, where apparently the agreement between the United States and TNT cannot necessarily be found. In fact, Attorney General John Jeremy, it was revealed by the state's lawyer that the AG had to launch a major probe into his predecessors and the Office of the Attorney General's handling of the extradition request for Jack Warner. So they believe that an agreement, or an arrangement was made It's just that they can't find it, apparently. And this has caused a whole new monkey wrench into the works with regards to the extradition situation. Now, one of the things about this whole situation, I'm just going to say this up front, and I don't care who dislikes it. This speaks nothing with regards to the charges that Mr. Warner has been indicted in a U.S. court for, right? He has not necessarily, he is pointing to the fact that he believes there's an injustice going on in extradition, which very well may be true. That does not necessarily have anything to do directly with the charges against him in the American courts, right? It does not disprove or prove that just because, oh, well, this extradition thing, they play it fast and loose, it means the charges with regards to FIFA, they're playing fast and loose. Now, I'm not saying that he's guilty. I'm just saying they are separate situations that technically need to be resolved individually. Mr. Warner is being very dramatic in his speech, and to be fair, there is at least some extent where he's not wrong saying it's not just for Jack Warner. These kinds of things set precedents. Even if it's not a legal precedent that the courts will utilize moving forward, it kind of sets the framework that will say, well, you know, we don't really cross our T's and dot our I's on issues like this. So if there's someone that needs to be extradited, we kind of just hand wave and let it happen, willy-nilly. We don't necessarily go through due process. And part of due process is the capacity to challenge these things. Even if we're just going through the motions and the challenge will not win. The point is, we still have to have the ability to ensure that they can be challenged and we can go through the process of them being challenged. At the very least, to assure us that the situation is on the up and up, that everything is done properly, everything is above board, everything is correct, just, right, fair, true. But they can't find the agreement, so I don't even know if we could begin to figure out with regards to the extradition. And look how long, it's 10 years ago. Now, Mr. Warner's attorney said that their clients lost 8 years of his life or something like that. I'm not entirely too sure how true that is. But what's interesting is I have no idea how this may change or not change our standing or the perception that we have by the American government. Because, I mean, it is a FIFA corruption scandal. We're not talking about some plot against America. So, we have to wait and see how that goes. On the other hand, there's a strange situation that I don't necessarily know what to make of it. The report came out early in the week, and I haven't spoken about it yet. But I think I don't want to let it go too long. And that is with regards to reported security concerns of a person within the proximity of the Minister of Homeland Security. Now, the report says intelligence agencies have raised red flags against a man employed by Minister Alexander. This person apparently is a key member of his personal team. Is it security? Is it administrative? Not entirely sure. He's apparently relative of a former police officer, and he is posing apparently as a security officer. One of the issues is apparently he has been seen in sensitive areas, right? So, Minister Alexander confirmed he employed the quote-unquote security officer when questioned by Newsday after a police commendation ceremony, right? This, again, quote-unquote, so to some extent you have to question how official or unofficial it is, because he's the brother of a police officer, don't know if he's had any training or not, what credentials he has to say that he's a security officer. But this person has been working with him since the campaign, right? Apparently, this person has been convicted on charges of using obscene language and resisting arrest back in 2007. Not necessarily the end of the world, big ticket charges, right? So, apparently there's other questions with regards to information potentially being removed from the police database, right? According to the report. So, there are police intelligence reports apparently relating to this security officer, right? But it seems as though the minister either doesn't want to or doesn't know how to respond to that. When shown a copy of the documents of the police intelligence report on the reporter's cell phone, he asked if the reporter had documents. He gave him his phone. He said, "That's your phone." I don't know if it's because he doesn't necessarily trust electronic versions of things. To be fair, you could fake documents electronically. It's a little bit harder than official paper documents, and maybe that's why we're moving at a snail's pace to digitize. But this is interesting to some extent. I mean, the minister is a former police officer. So I don't really know what to make of this, to be honest. It's just that this individual apparently has been flagged, including flagged by the security team protecting Prime Minister Modi, right? So, been in sensitive areas in the diplomatic center, I believe. And there's other issues, right, with regards to international arrangements and sharing of information through the Minister of Homeland Security. I don't necessarily know to what extent those are connected. The report doesn't necessarily connect those two things directly, right? But rather it just mentions the fact that a key ally sent an official diplomatic note raising concerns about sharing intelligence reports through Minister Alexander. We don't necessarily have details of what it said. Now, is it because of the individual that the minister has hired to work alongside him, which our own police apparently has flagged? I mean, a lot of this is just, we don't know much of anything, right? Can't say if it's bad, good, if it's fine, if there's nothing to say or not. And I think that's, for the most part, what the Newsday and the reporter is basically saying. Or the point is, and the reporter in this case is the writer of the article, right? That spoke to the minister, I believe. He's not necessarily giving us conclusions. He's just reporting what he's found. And in this case, this is one time when not giving context, I think, is appropriate, because you don't want to lead the audience to a conclusion which may be speculative and untrue. But it does leave us, I guess you could say, with questions, right? And what's interesting is, to what extent, when did the police intelligence report, when was it written up? Was it written up after Minister Alexander left the police service? And again, we do have a police commissioner that has worked in special branch as an intelligence officer. We assume he's worn the Punisher patch because of a joint operation with foreign agencies, right, as a sign of camaraderie. So he's had some experience with foreign agencies. We assume they trust him. This dynamic now brings up a lot of new questions. And I do wonder, will we get answers? Sometimes, look, there might not be a good way to answer it for the public and you just leave it alone. But that assumes that the situation is manageable and is not going to degrade further and or blow up in your face. But we don't know if it'll get to that point, right? We're kind of the outside looking in on this. I would be more comfortable if we got an explanation. But it won't be the first time if those things don't come down the pipe. So it'll be interesting to see if anything comes of this and what we will hear from our foreign partners. The minister runs the risk that whenever we get certain notices from foreign agencies that speak about ministers involved in X, or ministers or senior government officials involved in Y, or anything like that, or any questions to do with intelligence security breaches and the needing of new vetted units, or anything along those lines, the minister runs the risk of being caught up in that wake. Because a reporter did, look, the point is the reporter asked him about it, asked for comment, asked for a response, didn't really get anything. So now he's put what he has found out there. He's basically saying, these are reports that I found. I'm not making this up, pie in the sky kind of Nancy stories. And now Minister Alexander, because either he doesn't want to or doesn't know how to address it, runs the risk where, whether fair or unfair, he will be roped into that general discussion whenever it comes up again, even if he's technically not directly a subject of those issues or parts of those discussions. Like I said, with regards to anything with foreign agencies, maybe mistrusting our local agencies, wanting new vetted units or new procedures for security concerns. And if there's anything from the U.S. State Department, U.S. Embassy talking about senior government officials involved in X or Y, like they have been in the past. And this is unfortunately the reality of politics. You're no longer a police officer, so you can't necessarily hide behind the job, because unfortunately, you're not just there to do the job. You were chosen to represent us in a significant way that will color how we as a people are perceived, not just you yourself as a private individual and your employer, formerly the TTPS. Because now your employer is the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. So that's who you represent. And being a public person is not fair. That's unfortunately part of the price. To some extent, Minister Alexander should have known that when he was on television for all those years. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. We have to wait and see. But this whole thing about not wanting to speak, it's not necessarily limited to national security. It's across the board. And again, I think a lot of politicians and public-facing persons, even in private sector, do themselves a disservice when they don't know how to manage certain situations, and not saying anything is at times just as bad as saying the wrong thing. Will that be this time? We have to wait and see. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll switch gears and hit our all-new, semi-controversial, depending on who you speak to, topic. Not so much controversial here within TNT. When we return, we'll welcome the good lady. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WESN. Sean Michael Small will be right back after this.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
Where good private health care is affordable.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world. diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title, it's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. I'm back here talking about the WSND Content Capital Show. Michael Small, joined by the good lady herself, former Minister of Finance, Karen Shishera, who, well, I guess in a way, being a former Minister of Finance might give her a better perspective on certain aspects of the current topic that we're going to get into, because, of course, the Prime Minister, during the Emancipation celebrations, or part of her messaging, was speaking about reparations. It's an interesting topic in that I don't know if, for our specific situation, if there's anything that's a truly direct comparison, because there's a lot of complexities with regards to reparations for slavery and colonialism and just all of the different parties involved. It's not the same for every Caribbean country. It's not the same exact circumstances for every Caribbean countries. We do share common experience, though, generally speaking, and now trying to figure out how to restore the damage done from decades, hundreds of years ago, well, a couple hundred years ago. You know, it's not necessarily a simple thing, but it's not necessarily impossible either. And to speak about that, of course, Karen Shishera here.
Oh gosh, good morning, everyone. Listening to Sean's introduction to the topic, I probably wouldn't have looked at it from the same perspective, but then again, you know, people have different perspectives. So I don't know if we're going to say anything about emancipation, we leave that alone.
Oh, well, I mean,
up to you.
If you want, because it was an interesting question that you posed, of which I honestly don't have an answer, but I don't know if you want to bring it up.
Well, I don't have the answer for it, but what I raised, and this is in fact related to reparations, because the reparations that we are going to be speaking about is reparations specifically, not only to the British West Indian colonies, but specifically to Trinidad and Tobago. So, and it is born out of slavery, and therefore the connection is emancipation. So I was looking at the question of whether the name was a misnomer, Emancipation Day. And I'm not saying, you know, I'm giving a point of view. You certainly don't have to agree with it, but it is a point of view, because when you look at emancipation, which was a holiday, I think was 1985 or thereabouts, I do believe the rationale and the reason and the purpose and objective was a good one, and I do accept that. But I think when you look at it a little more closely, and in fact I had little discussions with very young persons, and they hit the nail on the head, the exact concern I had. And I said, what does emancipation mean? It means freedom. And then I said, well, what do you think about Emancipation Day for Trinidad as a holiday, a national holiday? And the person said, well, they abolished slavery because of economic reasons. It had nothing to do with you fighting. I said, oh, very good answer. So then I said, well, if a little young child could give me that answer and see what the nub of the problem, the issue, then it's not such a, you know, so incredible an issue to bring up. And why I say that is because the reality is, and that's what we will be talking about, reparations. Reparations is economics. It's about money. Whether it's in kind or in cash, it's about money. And reparations, it was about slavery, but slavery was about economics. It began because of that, and essentially it ended because of that. Yes, you had a lot of the work of the abolitionists, but their voices were not heard until the Industrial Revolution really took hold. So we're not doubting that they played a part, but the central reason was the reason why it started and the reason why it ended. So coming back to the Emancipation Day, I don't know what, I spoke to Sean about it yesterday. I said, Sean, I mean, what are we celebrating? The slave owners decided, and Britain decided that slavery, which principally was sugar in our Caribbean islands, was no longer profitable. It was not profitable for a number of reasons. So it was costing them more, the overhead of a slave, feeding and maintaining them, bringing them from the Africa to, you know, in the Middle Passage and all of that. It just was eating into their profit. It was no longer making sense. So they decided that suddenly the voices of the abolitionists were heard in a way that had not been heard before, and slavery came to an end. So what is that to celebrate? I mean, to me, it's a kind of a shame on Britain, and it's a kind of shame on the former slave owners. That's what I think is a shame of. It doesn't seem to me to be something for us to celebrate. And I use three examples. One, French Revolution. When they had the French Revolution, which of course you had the lower classes fighting and their aristocracy, they celebrate that victory every year by Bastille Day, because they take pride in that achievement. They were able to fight for liberty and inspire the American Revolution, actually. So that is understandable, yes, Bastille Day. And then we were United States, July the 4th, Independence Day. They fought and won their independence from Britain as a former colony. So yes, that is something to celebrate, because they fought and won. And if I had an example, if you were going to use an example within the Caribbean, would have been Haiti. When Toussaint Louverture fought and Napoleon's forces, which were kind of between fighting and war in Europe, and then, of course, look at what has happened, consequence to that country. And it all comes back to the economics. Yeah. It really does come to economics, because Haiti is largely in the condition it is because Napoleon and France, up to very recently, had to pay, Haiti had to pay a huge price from their treasury for having their independence, for being freed from slavery. But it does talk about, it does go to economics. So reparations is what we're speaking about. And yes, why I also bring it up, because we just celebrated Emancipation Day, and the Prime Minister spoke very strongly about leading the fight for reparations. And one newspaper, it says, Kamala vows to fight for reparations. And she spoke about the fact that, I think she put maybe the newspaper put the wrong price. Wrong price now. There's wrong date, because it says 1938. It's not that, it's 8. Anyway, the point is that she said the chains fell on 1838, which was really the end of apprenticeship, and 1834 was Abolition Day. The chains fell, yet their scars and spirits still whisper of torment and unassailable triumph. They see we stand on the shoulders, not merely to remember, but to press forward. And then she talks about we must mobilize actions, uniting council, civil society, etc. And she really spoke about the suffering that the slaves, which were African, of course, suffered. But I guess she's putting it in a positive way. But in my own opinion, emancipation was not something that we could really celebrate as former slave ancestors of slaves, because once you have mixed race, and one of those races is African, you have descendants who come from that experience. And it's not that we fought and won, like how Toussaint Louverture fought and won. They didn't want it anymore, because it wasn't making financial sense. So that's why it came to an end. So, and today, as I would say, Sean and I spoke about that, because the topic is fairly a sizable topic. You will see that Sir Hilary Beckles, the former principal of the Cable Campus, Barbados, Professor Hilary Beckles, highly respected, and the chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, wrote a book talking about today we still are suffering in modern times the consequences of slavery. So, I have a problem with that emancipation. So we're going to reparations.
Celebrating emancipation, right?
Give it another name.
Because to some extent, it's not something that was achieved. It was just something granted. So, I mean, it's an interesting point, right? What are we really celebrating? How should we celebrate it? Do we even fully understand? Because I guess it goes back, people have an issue with Columbus having statues, and how, I think it's how you frame history, right? Do you frame him as a great man, or you just frame him as a man that did a thing that led us to this point? So to what extent do you respect, to what extent do you celebrate? And I think it's a similar situation with emancipation, because history is this kind of weird thing where, well, if we celebrate it, and then eventually generations kind of forget the nuance of what happened, then all of a sudden we're like, oh, emancipation, this great thing that happened to us, when, I mean, it wasn't an achievement per se of anyone.
So, but I would want to say this so that I give a wrong impression. To think that you come from that kind of background of being treated as property, and it's still experiencing apartheid, segregation laws, and even today you still have it being played out. To see the advancement that have been made by persons who have come from that experience, who are the descendants of that experience, whether it is in music, and they own their own music. They're not playing music for. They now own their own music. Like what's the name, Jay-Z and all these people, right? And then in dance, popular music, dress. They're leading in that. When you get, and even in the sports, it would have been the province only of the rich and well-to-do and country club. The tennis and golf, all odds against you achieving,
but
and then
things like scientific achievement, academia,
yes, I was going to say. So there's no question that in music, in entertainment, in sports, where we've given the opportunity to think, and in academics, it has always been downplayed. It's always been downplayed. There are great achievements in the United States. You'd be amazed if you looked it up and you took time to see how much has been achieved against all odds. So I don't want to give the impression that I am saying what you're celebrating for, they were no longer viable, no longer profitable.
It's about what you're celebrating.
What we are celebrating is how, having gone through that 400-500 like Barbados, 500 years of slavery. How many generations? People lived for about 40 years back in the day, right? You look about 10 generations to see that you have come to be the prime ministers, the cabinet ministers, doctors, the lawyers, the businessmen, to achieve all that you have achieved against tremendous odds. That's what we celebrate. And I think the emancipation is not doing it, because if I could ask a young child and they could answer me back, well, why are we celebrating that? They only ended slavery because it was economics. So, you know, I don't want it to be that association. I want it to be an association of you have come, you've been, but you've looked what you have achieved against all odds.
The achievement that came after.
Yeah, the person said to me, call it achievement, I said, no, it's not school.
So, I mean, therein lies the question, what else could it be called? How else could it be framed? Yeah. Like I said, I don't necessarily have a good answer to it, because obviously you don't want to disassociate it. You don't want to disassociate it completely from the whole origin, the whole point of it. But at the end of the day, I think they're telling me that we need to take a break, so we need to settle something, and then we'll come back. So stay tuned. This is Talking About the WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
All right, I'm back here talking about the WSN. No, we weren't scared away from the topic. We're still going to speak about reparations, as the Prime Minister pointed out. Now, one of the things that I point out is I would like to know exactly what does that mean. And I framed my comments about the Prime Minister's statement with regards to what exactly is she asking for, because I don't think, but I could be wrong, that she was referencing UE's work with regards to reparations or CARICOM's work. She was just speaking generally. And it's just one of those things where, yes, she said she wanted to go from something that is an aspiration that are actually implemented. But my thing is, right, but we kind of need to stop just talking about it, you know, and start doing if we're serious about it. Because it's one of those things where it's not like a simple formula, 2 + 2 is 4, and then, you know, we put any variables, we get the answer, and it's done, and it's easy. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and it's probably going to take a bit of work to kind of get to a point that people will find acceptable. So, but
yeah, I just want to say before we move on, but we are dealing with reparations. The point I made, but I'm going to, I don't know if this week or next week I'll have to go to it in more detail, but the point is that the wrongs or the sufferings or the economic adversity that slavery caused to persons of Afro descent, or at least of that, you know, descendants of Afro-Trinidadians, didn't end with the slavery, and it continued. And Chalk Dust, Newsday has an excellent article on that, and he is quoted as talking about his own family because he was, well, we all know that Chalk Dust, Professor Chalk Dust, what is Chalk Dust? Liverpool, Dr. Liverpool. Yes, so he has his PhD, and he said, you know, I'm going to look into it. He was encouraged to look at it more, and he said he didn't look at it as an abstract topic. He said it thought about his own grandfather, Isaac Liverpool, and what he said is that his grandfather was like a common laborer. I know firsthand how that backbreaking work wore him down. He died poor, and he had no money on his society burial card. And then he went on to say, this is the point that he went on to say, he thought reparations should not just be about money but land. And again, he wasn't just thinking as an academic professor, but of the effect on him and his family. He said that I got to thinking, that's right, if my grandfather had been given some land of his own, he wouldn't have lived in such poverty. He would have had something to pass on to his children and grandchildren. The clip still looks on, this is cities built by slave labor or the wealth generated by the transatlantic trade. So the point he was making is that today we still are seeing the effects of that slavery. He said, I was trying to show how many Afro-Trinidadian people suffered during the post-slavery colonial period, especially under the whites who own much of the land in the country. So the point I'm making, not to be controversial on it, but it's just to say that it didn't come to an end. But the key thing is it is economics. It's not, as many people would think, based on racism. In fact, I rely very heavily, and anybody can do what I did, which is to go online and get a free copy of Capitalism and Slavery, Dr. Eric Williams. I did have a bought copy many years ago, but for the purposes of this discussion, I went online and I got a copy of the Capitalism and Slavery written by Dr. Eric Williams as his post-PhD thesis at Oxford University, where he was said to be the top student in history at Oxford. So he was saying that people believe that slavery was based on racism. It became that, and he's a nice quotation. And this is what he said, or words to this effect. He said, slavery was not born out of racism. Racism was a consequence of slavery. Slavery was not born out of racism. Racism was a consequence of slavery. And he went on to give a little bit more, develop it and say, slavery had created the pernicious tradition that manual labor was the badge of the Negro slave. Well, he used the word Negro back in 1945 and 1944, and his sphere of influence. So that's a really important point to make, and it is borne out by the facts, the history that he spoke about in Capitalism and Slavery. Capitalism and Slavery.
At the end of the day, racism didn't end, but slavery ended.
Exactly,
right?
And the reason it started, but the point about it is it did not start with African labor. It's all about the fact that the British, dealing with the British, we're not dealing with other colonial powers. We're dealing with the British West Indies and specifically our country. When they came to the West Indies, they found large swaths of land that they could have developed, and in the Caribbean mainly it was sugar. For the British colonial, it was sugar. And sugar, to be productive, because you're looking at your profit margin, you have to develop large acreages of land. Or is it acreages or acreage? Anyway, one of them, of land to be profitable. But then you have to look at your cost, your overhead costs. And the biggest overhead cost would be your labor costs. So you have to look at your profit margin. So for them, when they decided to develop plantations and grow sugar on a large amount, it was a question of making this thing work, making it profitable. And so, as Dr. Williams said, he said, slavery in the Caribbean has been narrowly defined with the Negro. A racial twist had therefore been given to a historically and economic phenomenon. He said the first instance of slave and slave labor was not the Negro, but the Indian. And they talk about the Amerindians. They said that they quickly succumbed to disease, measles, chickenpox, either what they call European, well, for want of a better word, because they had no immunity against those diseases. So that's killed them by the millions. Some of them prefer to commit suicide than succumb themselves to being slave labor. There's a famous place in Greendot called Les Sauterelles, which is a jumping point, a cliff that many of them jumped over, very symbolic. Others were not used to the kind of work that they were required to do, many, many long hours. They did the gentle sort of agro-farming, if you want to put it that way, maize and corn. but not, and an insufficient diet. So all of those combined, they died out. So the profit margin was deeply affected by the labor. Labor was no longer available by the Amerindians. So if you think they went to the African next, no, they did not. The immediate successor, this is what Dr. Williams says. He says the immediate successor of the Indian, however, was not the Negro, but the poor white. These white servants included a variety of types. Some were indentured servants. A lot of them they signed these contracts of indenture. Shown.
I had an early morning this morning.
They didn't know why I said that, you know. Now you gave me away.
Okay, this is my second show for the morning, Karen.
Yeah, all right, sure, all right. You didn't have to give me away, but the indenture, which is a
well, technically, I'm giving myself away.
Yes, a contract of labor. Some of them is indenture, and some of them were trying to escape feudalism. So they were kind of adjusted to living a life of a semi-slave, you know, because feudalism was close to that.
Yeah, serfdom was basically almost that.
Exactly, yeah. Serfdom, feudalism, then the poor laws. When we talk about the property tax, yes, a lot of the property tax, the origin of that was the poor laws. When you, depending on what area you lived in, the rich or the middle class had to pay the taxes for the poor in that area because they had to support their children and had to support the women who were now left abandoned by these men or their husbands. So the poor laws had, and of course we all know, so, please sir, can I have more? Oliver Twist, the children working in the houses. So that was something that they had experienced firsthand. And they're telling you it came from, and also, which I found was really interesting, so you had the indentured laborer. They kidnapped a lot of them. A lot of them were kidnapped. A lot of the children were encouraged by telling them you're giving them sweets. And these are contemporaneous reports of what was happening. And then a lot of them were convicts because, and you can understand why, because this is what they said, convicts provided another steady source of white labor. The harsh feudal laws of England recognized 300 capital offense crimes. You know what capital means? Hanging. And look at typical hanging offenses included picking a pocket for more than a shilling, shoplifting to the value of 5 shillings, stealing a horse or a sheep, poaching a rabbit on a gentleman's estate. Can you imagine you losing your life for things like that? Yeah. So, yeah, so a lot of them went to Australia, the New World, which is the United States, and a lot of them came to the Caribbean. So we had a mishmash of persons, and they said, they said what they sent here were all these, they said they would banish these people who were vagrants, rogues, and idlers, petty thieves, gypsies, and loose persons frequenting unlicensed brothels. They were glad to get rid of them because they said they were bringing down the image of the United Kingdom. So a lot of these persons who came here and who worked on those plantations after these Amerindians who died, or would, I didn't say killed out, but they succumbed, were the poor white. And for a variety of reasons, they came. And the transportation of the white servants was, according to Dr. Wilson and according to contemporaneous reports, the suffering of these white indentured vagrants, etc., this mishmash of persons on the Middle Passage, they said it was just as bad as what was experienced by the African slave in the Middle Passage, which we hear a lot about. They said they went through, because it's all about profit, they had to put as many persons in labor into that ship as possible because that was their source of labor and that was their highest expense. In fact, you got a report of someone saying that she was shocked at how these people were treated, to believe that human nature could be so depraved as to treat fellow creatures in such a manner for so little gain. And they were talking about the white indentured laborers. So that came to the Caribbean, and we're talking about the West Trinidad and specifically. So why did that not work out? Well, you get reports about, things that are not very, they didn't want to come in the first place. They were trying to run away from something. They weren't running to something, they were running away from something. So that's part of it, and some of them were kidnapped. So you didn't exactly have persons who were there wanting to work hard and labor under a hot sun. No, you didn't have that encouragement. But what was the major reason why they could not continue to use that source of labor, because it affected the profit margin so, at such a great extent, was most of them were indentured. And as I said, an indenture is a contract. And these contracts were either for 5 to 10 years, but once it came to an end, they were free. And once they got their freedom, they were also given land. They were given land, and they went and lived. You stop working on the plantation, you're free. So you go and do a little homestead, and you grow your own sugar, you grow your own provisions, you have your own husbandry, and that's what happened. So they lost the labor. And so they decided, well, it's costing us more to bring in the white labor because we only have it for a specific period of time. So that's when the idea of African slave labor came, because guess what? They were treated as property, and you owned it for a lifetime. So you got far more profit out of the slave labor from Africa than you got out of the indentured laborer from Europe. And well, we know what happened to the Amerindians. So that is why I started by saying racism was not, slavery was not, racism was not born out of slavery. Racism was born out of slavery. Slavery was not born out of racism. It was not the reason. It was who could do the job and make sure that my profit margin.
And from what I understand, it was because they needed to justify why is this group enslaved? How could you enslave them? Aren't we all Christians? Don't we all believe in certain moralities? And the way around that is to basically have the propaganda of, well, no, they're not humans, therefore we don't have to treat them as such. And that's been one of the long-standing consequences because of it.
It is so true, because when you hear some of the descriptions that he uses, then they describe it, because they have to justify what they're doing, right? So you have to justify, you have to subhuman. We have to be subhuman. So, and then they bring Christianity, but that's human nature. I put it down to human nature. It's all profit-driven, no matter what. It's profit-driven.
You'll find a way to make it sound right.
So this affects us in the Caribbean, but the point about it, you can go from country to country, and in Europe, and they fought each other, how many wars, how many intermarriages they had in order to stop fighting each other.
Yes.
You know, that's the problem too. Europe is not a country, it's a continent made up of how many countries? The same thing, Africa is not a country, it's a nation, and it's a continent, and it's made up of 54 nations. So people treat it as though everybody, it was a kumbaya in Africa, and they sold out and their own people, but they were fighting each other. They were enemies in their own country. They were one and all. They were different tribes, Yoruba, Igbo, whatever. So a lot of the persons that were sold into slavery would have been former slaves themselves in Africa.
Also, to some extent, I think one of the things that I can't remember where I read it, but we also have to think, it's not necessarily like an African race. The genetics are different. They have different physical traits.
That's true.
Depending on the environment, depending on the traditions, depending on the
tribe,
right?
Yes,
some in sub-Saharan Africa versus Southern Africa, some in more arid lands, some in deserts. Everyone lived a different way, right? And it's so big. Why would it all just be one small gene pool? No, it's a large gene pool.
And he did speak about that. He said that, the Yoruba, he talked about the Igbo, he talked about the different, I don't know, I don't like to use the word tribe, but I don't know what other word it can use at that time.
I mean, I think it's because when we use it for certain races, it's associated with racism. But at the end of the day, in Europe at certain times, there were tribes that eventually became countries and nations. But I mean, not too long ago, they were still just tribes at the end of the day.
Yes, and what they said, which is you're making the point that you're seeing still this association of intellectual inferiority associated with that, and it came out of having to rationalize treating a human being as property. You had to rationalize it. So in fact, I see here, and he's quoting from somebody called Bassett. He's talking about North Carolina. It was a survival of the fittest. Both Indian slave and white servants were to go down before the black man's superior endurance, docility, and labor capacity. The features of the man, his hair color, dentrifice, maybe his teeth, his subhuman characteristics, so widely pleaded, were the later rationalization to justify a simple economic fact. And what Sean is saying is true. So they used that, and then one of the arguments they used was that they couldn't stand the sun. You know, they came from Europe. They have winter and they have autumn and all that good stuff. But yeah, but they went to Australia and they're still there. And that's what he said, actually. And you look at the United States, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, sometimes their temperatures, even if you look in today's, in spite of climate change, before climate change, they have temperatures higher in some of those states, in New York during summer. And if you're living in southern, there's no winter. So he said that whole argument, Cuba was mostly white slave for tobacco, and they still live in there generations later. So that was just one of the many arguments used to rationalize something that was driven by economics. And, you know, I guess what I really want to emphasize as we reach to this point is that, you know, it's about economics, it's about profit, it's about greed, if you want to put it that way, but that is part of the human condition. So, as part of the human condition and economics, Great Britain, was able to build its economy basically on the backs of, initially, of the slave trade. A lot of the wealth of many of the Liverpool, Manchester, Bristol, all of these slave ports became extraordinarily wealthy. In fact, one of the reports that, and he quotes it in his book, he said that Barbados, on 166 square miles, was worth more to Britain than 4 of the states in the United States. I think Pennsylvania, they called it out. The value of Barbados, because of the sugar was king at that time, was worth more to Britain than 4 states in the United States when they were a colony of Great Britain. So you have to understand it was about profit and who was going to give them the greater profit margin, and in order to be able to rationalize treating a human being as property, they had to do what they did, and today we still see that being played out, which is unfortunate. Today we still see that. In fact, just on an aside, there was a newspaper, not the Newsday, but there was a newspaper that had an advertisement for their paper, advertising their own newspaper, and they had 3 young men, black men, and they were walking around like apes, and they said, "Stop monkeying around." I rang them up. I said, "How could you do that?" They said, "There's a stigma attached to that." I said, no, there's not. That was about 20 years ago. And they didn't stop the advertisement. They still continued showing the advertisement. And, you know, so it tells you that how that stigma has continued to play out, and that is why the reparations has become so important. And I think we could either start with the reparations and see what are the potential, because in South Africa, in South Africa, when they abolished apartheid, and they, I think it was in 1991, they abolished apartheid. They then looked at the issue of how reparations, they had a Reparations Act. They have a Reparations Commission. And there were 3 things that they looked at: redistribution of land, which would be for the government for public purposes. No, acquisition of land, which would be for public purposes and by the government, to just acquire it. Redistribution of land, and also acquiring by sale. And the reason why that is a feasible option, apart from paying you for the money's worth
in South
Africa, because the persons who were living with their land, it was divided into 4 quarters. Quarter 1 was the most fertile land, then quarter 2, quarter 3, and then quarter 4 was the least fertile. And these people, South Africans, were pushed off their land by violence, by murder, by killing, violently pushed off their land and put into the quarter 4 to land that was arid, that was dry, it was infertile. So they can't speak about redistribution because it is possible, but in Trinidad, in terms of reparations, speaking about reparations in the context of land, I don't think that is feasible, I don't think that is viable, but we can speak, I don't know if we want to go into that.
CARICOM has a 10-point plan. I think there's more than one entry that speaks to funding. One of them is actually funding for repatriation to Africa. One is debt cancellation and monetary compensation, which is where you want. And I think a lot of people, when they think about, now there's certain other things like, establishment of cultural institutions, and assistance in remedying the public health crisis. But to me, those are kind of offshoots of monetary compensation, because it's essentially, well, we're gonna, one case, you're just giving us the money, as opposed to, well, we'll put the money to something up front. But it comes back down to monetary compensation, which is one of those things where...
It was based on that, in economics.
Yeah, it was based on economics. So there's some starting points to calculate it. Not necessarily, like I said, easy and direct formulas.
Have calculated it, which I saw.
No, but remember what I said. As someone who is not necessarily all gung-ho about reparations, what you told me, I actually thought kind of sounded kind of potentially too low.
Okay, but so let me just say this. Let me have a call, but let me just say this before we go to the call. The commission has done, put figures, numbers, UE,
right.
So the commission, UE Commission, CARICOM Reparations Commission, and they have put figures to those things. They've said at the time when, you see why is economics too, which I've skipped over a large part when they decided to bring it to an end, is because when they ended slavery, they compensated the former slave owners for the loss of their slaves. It is an act called the Slave Compensation Act 1837, and they said for the loss of their service. I don't think it was service, loss of their property. That's what it was, right? And they were compensated for losing slaves. That's what they got money for it. And in fact, they did calculate it. It has been calculated. They said at the time, present value of, at the time, the value of the compensation is 20 million pounds, which is 200 million.
This is in total, right?
Yes, 20 million pounds. But if you look at that amount at the time, it was equivalent to 20% of the government's treasury at the time, the value of the government's treasury at the time, 20%. And they said if you took just the cost of the labor, and you put it at present value, they brought it to 16.5 billion pounds. So it can be calculated. Nobody's saying it should be exact.
No, but I actually, like I said, I actually do think that figure to me sound, now it's just, it's a layman's determination. It sounds kind of low for the scope of what we're speaking about.
That's not the point. The point is that for people to fight against it by saying, how are we going to do that? How are we going to think? How are we going to think? Yes, it can be done. And if you're looking for excuses for it not to be done, it can be done. That's the point. And it's already been done in UE. They signed an agreement with the University of Leeds to compensate, to contribute to the University of the West Indies the 10 million pounds. And one of the persons, Mrs. Freeman, already donated 500,000 US to the commission. So do not say, because her husband's family were slave owners. So do not say you cannot calculate it. You might not get it exact. Nobody's asking for it exact. But take off all that debt you have us paying. Take off all that aid you have us giving us. We don't want the aid. We don't want the debt. Take it away and let us then start thinking. Don't do us what you did to Haiti.
Well, I mean, the debt cancellation, that seems to be, that could be very straightforward. We have Kunupia on the line. We'll take the call. Good morning, caller.
Sorry, Kunupia. I'm sorry. I had to say this, though. He must be so mad.
Caller, good morning.
He gone?
I'm not sure.
Hello, morning.
Morning. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah. All right, I want to get on the program.
Yes, you're on the program. Go ahead, caller. Do you have a question or contribution?
Okay, yeah. The waiting threw me off a little bit.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
One thing, is the Columbus statue have anything to do with repatriation?
Reparations? No, I don't. It wouldn't. It is technically
okay,
yes. It is kind
because
of.
I want to say something on it. But
go ahead.
Here what? Did England went to India and asked about repatriation? Yeah.
I'm not sure. Oh, you mean if India asked England for reparations?
Yeah.
Not sure.
What happened is that
it's not the same thing.
India tell them, listen, we're done with that. All we want is the gem on the crown.
Right.
You see that gem?
Yeah.
On the crown they have?
Yeah.
Worth a lot more.
Yeah. Well, is that it, caller?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Wait, is there any more?
I kind of agree. Look, as you was talking about in Barbados, the cane field still working, the cane and everything working. So the people are benefiting from it still. In Trinidad here, we tend to close down the sugar factory and thing. So it didn't work for the people because the people still live here and want to go to England and go to America and thing. For the same people, you are asking for money. You understand what I'm saying?
All right.
So I get a little throwback, but I'll cut off here.
Sorry about that call. I think you were going to say, and I assume...
I definitely have to say something to what you just said.
The situation with India and the
First
Caribbean
of all,
is not the same.
It's absolutely not the same. Because why did I say that they turned to African labor? Because of the white indentureship arrangement. An indenture is a contract of labor, and it no longer worked out for them because at the end of the indentured period, they would be given land and they would no longer want to work on the plantation. That is why they turned to the African slave trade. So the persons who were involved in indentureship, by and large, were persons, at least in the English experience, were running away from something, not running to something. In the case of the African, he was treated as property, and he was owned as property for his entire life, apart from the inhumanity of it, and stripped of his culture, stripped of his language, stripped of his family, stripped of his traditions, stripped of everything that made him a human being. He was forced there, and they turned to him because indentured labor cost so much. And on the issue of sugar, one of the reasons why the economy in relation to sugar, slavery was no longer viable, because places like Brazil, India, and Indonesia had huge swaths of land and were producing the sugar at half the cost that was coming from the West Indies. Half the cost, and that has continued. And the Ministry of Agriculture, I remember when the European Union said the ending of that arrangement, they had a preferential treatment. At one time when the Ministry of Agriculture had to pay back $5 billion because sugar was not contributed to the GDP of the country. It was a liability simply because it was not the labor cost, and the lack of land made it thing. And if you talk about Barbados, Barbados has sugar only in St. John's, and it's for their rum industry. So I do encourage the starting back sugar, but a sugar industry based on providing sugar for the chocolates and sweet industry and for the rum industry. I do agree with that. But for you to say Barbados GDP is based on their financial services and on tourism, it's not based on sugar. And that is why you think there's no country, Antigua and every one of them, don't have sugar plantations anymore? Why do you think they don't have it? You think, because it's not profitable. Because Brazil, India, Indonesia can grow it for half, because would you buy it from a country where it's twice as much? No, you wouldn't. So stop blaming other people for what happened.
Well, I'm not sure if he was...
No, he was saying
I don't know if he was putting it together.
He was saying no, because he said that they need to, what is growing in England and America? Well, that's why you have to blame England, because they are the ones that have us in this state. They are the ones which Dr. Beckles and many people have written about Dr. Liverpool are the consequences of that. Taking away my language, taking away my culture, taking away my children, taking away my family life, stripping me of everything that made me human. Not for 20 years, not for 30 years, for 400, 500 years. You going to compare that?
Yeah, it's not reparations for territorial conquest. It's reparations for slavery. That's why it's different.
It's economics. You built your wealth. The shipbuilding in Bristol and Manchester and all those seaports. The shipbuilding, the investments in banking and investments. Sorry.
We have a caller waiting. I didn't want to cut time, but we had to cut eventually yes. Because we don't want to call waiting too long. St. James, good morning. You on the air?
Yes. Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah. Listen. Do you remember that we celebrated Columbus Day with a carnival type atmosphere, activities? Why then did Eric, who was considered the Messiah in those days, go against it? Columbus Day celebration, I believe, was stopped because of a man being killed in a band. Is it that the country in those days did not understand what Columbus was responsible or contributed to for in terms of slavery? Was it that, you know, they didn't understand then?
Well, so, caller, I mean, this is one of the things though. Columbus, okay, yes, you could say he's responsible for what happened to the Amerindians, at least to some extent, right?
Yeah, I think
but how is Columbus, and I think I said this before, how do you tie him to the Atlantic slave trade? That happened in the 1500s, like I think either 2 decades to half a decade after Columbus reached Trinidad for the first time. Like, I don't know if you could put that on him, because then I
could answer that, but I'll answer it after Canupia.
Right?
I'll answer him. I will answer that. I can hopefully. Yes.
But okay, we'll take Canupia.
And then
caller, good morning, you on here?
Hello. Yes.
Yeah.
Morning, caller.
Yeah, yes. I was listening. Is I who called here just now, right? Now, you're saying when I mentioned about Barbados, sugar still going on, even right here in Trinidad. When I think about Carib Brewery, the amount of sugar they use. What I'm saying here that some of these things still exist. That employment was for the people. They actually helping. It helping people. You understand? So we're not moving on. We're not taking on. We're looking back for something that it didn't have modern time things. We had change. You understand? Okay, thanks.
Okay, you're making me be more direct in what I'm saying. The reality is, I do agree that they should have sugar growing in Trinidad, but for specific purposes. And the purposes, yes, if it's for the beer, I agree with you 100%. For rum, Angostura, 100%, I agree with you. And also for the sweets and chocolate enterprise, I agree with that. But to have sugar as one of your maids, like how you have natural gas and well, not anymore, oil, as your export market, sugar was not that, and that's the reality. Well, that whether you want to accept it or not, it is a fact.
It no longer was viable as that.
Not only, what I'm trying to answer him is, if it is that slavery was what made growing sugar, because in fact it was so profitable, slavery, they said one of the problems they had, and they were running out of land, was when they did an acre, instead of refertilizing it and so on, they just moved on, because they said it was cheaper for them to move on to another acre of land than to fertilizing. So after a while, they ran out of fertile land. So you have to understand that it's a question of a profit margin. An indenture is a contract. I'm not saying it wasn't bad. I am not saying that at all. I am saying, if you look at it from a profit margin point of view, that is why the slavery was introduced, because we were not under contract of labor. We were property. And what I am saying to you, what was already happening all back in the day from the 1830s, is that the growing sugar from Brazil and all these other countries was half the and India was half the cost of here. Okay, but I just have to answer him. And because I was the Minister of Finance at the time when the European Union ended the preferential treatment, the reality was that so much of our population was involved in sugarcane planting that if they put the combined harvesters, which would have made it mechanized it and made it make more sense, a lot of people would have have no employment, and the country could not afford that political impact. So they continued something that was unprofitable because of the political impact of it, and that is a reality that you have to face.
Okay, we have Claxton Bay on the line waiting. Caller, good morning, you on here?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, hello, good morning. Good morning, Sean and
caller, mute your TV. Mute your TV, caller.
Yeah, Sean and Mr. Shera. Yeah, the TV mute. Yeah. And they really lost my treasure too. But Mr. Shera, you've been saying some things for the past week or so, and even at this present time here. And I think what happening is that if our country could understand the truth about all these things that happen to African people today, you understand? it will be so significant that we wouldn't even need this stand your ground guns law and all kind of stupidness, because there are people really illiterate and backward, you know. That's what you have to say, you know. They're illiterate and backward, and some of them don't want to know the truth. If they really know the truth of what really happened in this country, we will be such a profitable country. But it's because a lot of people don't know, and even the Africans don't know. And what you are...
What are you talking about?
Caller?
What are you talking about?
I don't know. I don't think so. Oh. Okay, we believe the caller got caught on his end.
Yes, that's
right.
That.
So we have another caller.
Very passionate, though.
Arima, caller, are you there? At least I hope it was cut. We stopped hearing the caller.
Yeah, yes, all of a sudden.
But I was hearing background noise.
But I want to answer the Columbus point, yes, still.
Yeah, okay, right. But Arima, are you there? Sorry, what was that?
Is anybody there?
Hello, good morning.
Morning, caller. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning to you, Sean, and to my former MP, Mr. Nesty Shera.
Good morning.
Interesting discussion. But, Mr. Shera, I'm kind of disappointed in you.
Okay.
Because you're supposed to explain to the gentleman that economies of scale, just cost per unit, it is a lot cheaper for us to import sugar than to produce it here.
Yeah, yeah.
But Sean and I have a discussion concerning solutions. Now I have one to take him today, but I wouldn't do it because I like this discussion. I like this topic. And for me, the formula, because something wrong with the formula, because think about it. The Depeche family donated the Queen's Park Savannah to Trinidad and Tobago. Back then. What do you think is the value of that land now? Because we're about 191 years since slavery has been abolished. And we had to go back about 300 years before that for the duration of the whole thing. How are we putting our value on that today? For real. No formula, no amount of money could pay for that. Yeah, that barbaric act that took place. All right? And I understand where the Emancipation Support Committee and its supporters are coming from. But they have to understand something, you know. History is facts and we have to learn from it. So, right now, currently has 77,000 acres of land sitting down there. Well, it is 77,000 because farmers would have gotten some. We have orchards with oranges planted. It's all kind of thing planted on it. What are we doing about that? Because when we look at the economics of it, an apple coming from halfway around the world, and it is cheaper than an orange. It is cheaper than a Julie mango. It is cheaper than a coconut, a sapodilla. And these things grow in here, and they are maintenance free. So we have to study the way forward here. Now, I mean to say it's nice to look back, you know, because you have to look back to ensure that those mistakes are not made. But I don't think that reparations could really put a value on the suffering that black people endured over that period of time. Thank you and have a good day, people.
You know, I have to say it's unfortunate that although you say you recognize it, you then, a lot of people will be happy to hear what you just said, you know. A lot of them are happy. If I was from Great Britain, I'd be very happy to say, look, we want to do it, you know, but it's just not, we can't calculate it. Nobody's saying it's an exact science. They knew how to calculate it to pay the compensation back to the slave owners. They knew how to calculate that. There's a present value of money. We have actuaries. They have people who are mathematicians. And they don't have to, it's not an exact science. You will never get the right thing, but you can't say, because I can't give you the right amount, we shouldn't have it. What is that thinking?
Well,
and let me just read
something. I don't
something.
know if he said that, because I'm
not...
not...
he said you're going backwards. He said, well... No, that is what he said. He said you're going backwards,
because
forget about backwards.
I want to point out something. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I think that just using the formula that you gave me sounds low to me.
Right, so it's
right?
a starting point. I am
right.
not a member of the commission, I'm not
right.
a mathematician, I'm not an actor, I'm not any of those things. But I'm saying, maybe the lawyer in me is talking. The principle is, should there be some since the slavery was born out of an economic reason, and it ended for an economic reason, and the basis for that economy to be where it was the slave trade, should there be reparations? And if we accept that, do not argue against your own self to say, oh, you can't work it out. Nobody's saying it's an exact science, and I already said, if you're listening to the show all the time, the university, the CARICOM Reparations Commission, entered into an agreement with the University of Leeds, with the University of West Leeds, a £10 million figure for reparations specifically. So how come they figure that out?
Now,
how come they figure that out?
I'll say this. Because the CARICOM 10-point plan includes something about culture and includes something about psychology. But and I think this is the distinction we need to make. What Karen is speaking about is the economic impact. She's not trying to monetize.
But you could, because in damages, which I told you yesterday.
Well, okay, yes, there's also that, yes.
I told Sean, when I was at law school, I know they might call it something differently now, but when I was there, it was called damages, a whole course on damages. You had to calculate the damages when damages were at large. And there's damages for the compensation, then there's aggravated damages, because when you look at the conditions under which the wrong was occurred, then you should be compensated for something, and they put a figure to it. They have the judicial discretion. And then there's punitive damages, where the court is trying to send a message to the wrongdoer that we are saying not only was it bad, but we are saying to you that you should be punished and pay more than the normal measure. So all I am saying, and what you get paid for, suffering, pain, and suffering for the embarrassment, the shame and humiliation that you were subjected to. If the courts can break a figure to your pain and suffering, to your loss, and there are actuaries who do present value of money, do not tell me you cannot do it for this.
Right, but just the example that you're giving us was speaking, directly to the economic situation. At the end of the day, slavery was an exploitation.
Yeah, but I gave it a figure.
I said
aggravated and punitive damages for those other parts of slavery.
All right, we have, I think Laxton Bay is back, that we lost earlier.
Yeah.
Meet your TV again, caller.
Yeah. Yeah, about here. The thing is, we talk about if people could only know the truth, and they always say attorney, like Mr. Shearer, they say they study history. So I know Ms. Bissessa know very well about the history. You understand? And she is one should know and help this country now that she is in position to get rid of the same slavery that is still happening today, right in this country. Because we have the color code. We have where people just watch you because of your color. Just because of your color. They watch you because of where you come from. All these things, but we need to, if we could continue this talk and get more people on board to help people understand why we should live in a more harmonious way, a united way, and build this little country that we have. Instead of just having this set of racism, unnecessary, that is unnecessary racism, because there are people who know and there are people who don't know. And if we have people like Mr. Shearer, who well know, because this is the second time I listen to her talking about some real positive things there. If she could get that on board with the Prime Minister today, we could have this country going forward with always happening. You understand? With always happening today. Right now, this country is like on automatic, because so much things happening. I don't even hear Sean talk about it. Before you hear him talk about the PNM, even Mr. Shearer, because she maybe had a beef with the former minister. But we need to get on board to have things going forward. Right? Thank you.
Okay, can I read this? No, Sean, let me just read this out, because hold on. There's another call. Oh, Kunupe back again? Oh my gosh.
We'll try with Kunupe again. Caller, good morning. Caller?
Hello?
Yes, caller.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Sean, you there?
Go ahead. Yes, caller, go ahead.
Yeah. Mr. Shara, I didn't want to go down that road with the carrying limited on that. My point to what I was trying to make, that you had a industry, and the industry was helping the people employment, right? Now I will tell you something. We close it down. Now you admit that you was the minister at the time,
Not when it
right?
closed
And it
down.
wasn't valid. But we end up opening, and as I say, I don't want to go down that road. But I'm trying to explain something. It was helping the workers. We come and close down that. At least we was making some US. But we end up opening CPEP, and look what happening today. Look what going on today with CPEP. We never get nothing out of CPEP. But when you sell the sugar, and this is what I say, we have management. As a manager, you're supposed to go and say, well, look, let me go somewhere else. If we are selling this here, let me try somewhere else, right? It's not just about the economy, but you have to have work for workers. At the days of slavery, that was happening. They tried to get work for workers. And I mean, it went around the wrong way, but so what? We had to do something. Right? I would like to go on a little discussion, but I wanted to understand it's
Maybe
not just
next week
fighting it
you could call
or
that.
talking too much about holding on to the cane, but the employment is the important thing.
No, I think that's what I said.
But all right, thank you, caller. We have to end it there because we are not caller waiting. But I think you're kind of missing the point. And Arima also kind of back to what Karen was saying. The industry wasn't viable. The industry was not making money. It was making money because we had preferential prices for sugar from Europe. And then they stopped it. And
even then it wasn't making money.
It
But
wasn't
for the
making
same
money.
reason that he said, which is a good reason, employment.
At the end of the day, you might as well just don't do the sugar and give the people the money.
Or
right?
give them the land to do something else with it.
Right? So closing it down was because, look, you can't have an industry that is unprofitable just for the sake of giving people jobs.
I think what he's
That's
making
not
a good
sustainable.
point. I think the good point he's making is that if you close it down because it was not viable, it was not making money for the country, it's costing us more.
Yeah.
The government shouldn't just have done, they should have, just as how they worked on natural gas and built up that industry with LNG, they should have had an alternative, a proper alternative in the agri and agribusiness at the time, rather than leaving it to people to do what they wanted to do.
Or quickly, even if it's making losses in the immediate term, it could have been an investment for food security in the future.
But I agree with that part.
That statement from me is hindsight, though, I will admit. We are San Fernando, last call. Good morning, caller, you on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Good morning, Karen.
Good morning. I was wondering when we'd hear from you.
I would just, I'm not going to put my 2 cents into this thing, this conversation. Just, it is so, this whole conversation is so emotional for a lot of people. But let me just say this. Mr. Moody was here recently, right? I go into the question of calculation, Sean. India has calculated that the economic impact of colonialism on their country, they have calculated that that Britain owes them $54 trillion. An official figure by the country of India. So, if we want to, it can be calculated. That's my point. It can be calculated, as Karen said. This is a starting point, but it can be calculated. And a lot of there's a particular channel in India. Every time they have an issue with Britain, they bring it up. They actually brought it up last week when Britain in London, they have a congestion charge in London, and they're saying that the Indian embassy owes the city of London $9.1 million for congestion charge, and they have refused to pay. Just like the U.S. and a couple other countries, they're refusing to pay because they see the tax and diplomats are exempt from a tax. And they have referenced that in the argument not to pay the $9.1 million, saying that you all owe us $54 trillion. Pay that first. So they can be calculated. Have a good day, Sharon.
Thank you. And I think that's the point that I wanted to make, whether or not whatever country, if your argument is it happened a long time ago, you can't calculate it, that's not going to hold. And how can you do it? It can't be land. So I'm going to read from you what Dr. Hilary Beckles said and some of these solutions. And I want to go back to the Christopher Columbus and Eric Williams.
One of the things that I say when I think the formula for that specific part that I think is too low is because I believe that act only compensated the slave owners for the slaves that they had at the time. It doesn't, and I'm not saying the slave owners should have gotten more. I'm saying if you're using that for the basis, you're only, hold on.
I haven't saying anything.
No, but you're not really following what I'm saying. If you're using the act as a basis for reparations, it only speaks for the slaves of that generation at the time the act was enacted. It doesn't take into account, from what I understand, just browsing the act, the generations of economic exploitation. And that doesn't include, then you could get into damages on top of that. That's why I'm saying just starting off with that 20 million and adjusting for inflation is too.
Okay, so the lawyer in me is answering you to tell you, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of that argument about whether you can calculate it if you can't calculate it.
I'm not, Karen, you are misunderstanding me. I'm not going down that rabbit hole.
Sean,
I am just pointing out.
We're next to each other.
I am just yes, I know.
And tell him to shut up.
I am just pointing out, my observation is not to go down that rabbit hole. My observation is that.
I wasn't directing it at you, you know.
Okay, right, okay.
I was not directing you. Actually,
no, but it was a response of what I just said.
No, I was not directing it.
Okay.
I guess it's the guy from Arima that more had in my mind. Because he is saying it was wrong, but that happened a long time ago, and so forget it. And I'm saying.
Yeah, I think the example he gave, I would actually argue, is harder to try to figure out because land property values are very weird. This is very different.
And this is what I was trying to say, and I was not arguing with you because I know what you're saying. You're saying maybe it's too little. But what I am suggesting is maybe the lawyer in me is saying, what is the principle? Is it capable of calculation? First of all, should it be paid? How is it going to be paid? And can it be calculated? You're not going to sort of a science and thing, but it is something that needs to be addressed. How can you address it? In South Africa, redistribution is one of these. We can't have that solution. And is it still around? The gentleman said that happened a long time ago. But we are the apples and mangoes and all of that you just talked about is the consequence of Tate and Lyle or whatever it is, the sugar people leaving Trinidad because it didn't make any more sense to be here in Trinidad. It is all the Lloyds of London, all of the foreign Barclays Bank that was here in this country, and they had to open a penny bank and unit trust because you couldn't get in there because the investments, the shipbuilding, the insurance was the purview solely of the slave owners, and we are living it today. So don't say that's not, it's back in the past. If you want to argue that against yourself, you go ahead and argue that. But I would never accept that. And thankfully, neither does Dr. Beckles. And this is what he had to say. This is a press release. He said, the modern Caribbean economy invented, structured, and managed by European states for one purpose, to achieve maximum wealth extraction, to fuel and sustain their national, financial, commercial, and industrial transformation. This systemic brutality of the transatlantic trade, its enslaved Africans and the plantation economies did not disappear with the abolition of slavery. You heard that, Mr. Rima? Rather, the means of exploitation were reconfigured to ensure that the wealth continued to flow to European states, suppressing systematically economic development in former colonies and refusing to accept responsibility for the debt and debt support they owe the Caribbean. And that is what has destroyed Haiti. That is what, so don't tell me you can't pay, that is what Napoleon and France extracted from Haiti for them to have their independence. After they fought so hard and they got it, and then they transferred it to one of the big banks. I don't want to call the name of the bank. And they were not able to develop their schools, their hospitals, their roads, because all the money was going to France. And France continued that up to a few years ago. And Haiti, you're talking about poor Haiti, they take no responsibility for it. But they knew how to extract the debt from a poor country. Why? Because they wanted to be free. That is what, so don't tell me.
Well, also, they wanted to make Haiti an example.
Of course, because they're afraid. They're afraid of the impact he will have on other Caribbean islands, and they will want to do the same thing. So don't tell me it can't be done. And if you argue that, you're arguing against your own self. Dr. Beckers, this can be done. It's how you calculate it. It's not an exact science, but you're not going to tell me you built your wealth in England. And in the Museum of Natural History, they said if you removed all the artifacts of the gold, and as the gentleman talked about, the diamonds and so on, from the Museum of Natural History in London, you would have nothing left. Nothing left. I bet you they could calculate it. When the Queen wearing a tiara, and whoever wearing the diamonds and walking around with whatever jewels they have, they have diamonds in England, they have gold in England. Where it came from? Where it came from? That's what but they have no problem with keeping that in their country. And their people are fighting now for that. And that answers the question about Columbus. Dr. Eric Willis is 1944. When we became free, it was 1956. Many countries in Africa were still under the colonial powers. We were, a matter of fact, one of the examples of fighting for our independence. And what you have to understand, a country has to evolve. And this whole issue about the statues has become a live issue, not only in Trinidad, in the United States, where they started to say a lot of the universities, where the historically black schools, like Morehouse and Spelman and Hampton, they started because they could not go to the Yales and the Harvards, right? That's why those schools started. So when you're saying, you're talking about the statues, they are saying a person puts up a statue to celebrate and honor them, you know. You don't put up a statue to say, look how bad you are, you know. You don't put up, anybody seen a statue in a park or see it anywhere. It is obviously reverence and admiration. And what they're saying is, it is part of our history, yes, put it in a museum. And put it in context. Don't say that Christopher Columbus discovered Trinidad. He did not. There were people living here, but maybe they don't count as people. But so what they're saying is, it's a time. It's timing and everything. And what is going on right now is a movement that probably had to take time and generations and education and the ability to use the phone, that phone and social media. I mean,
the internet.
Oh my God, with the spring, the Arab Spring. Remember that thing with the Arab Spring?
That's what I wanted to say. The thing is, it's kind of hard to for people, well, why did they do that then? Speaking about but also, like, it was just a different time.
And uneducated, most of us were not university education. Most of us didn't even have high school education.
Right? And just the whole concept, he discovered Trinidad and Tobago. Well, that was the narrative at the time. Now, of course, people, when you think about it, right, there were people there before. As Karen just pointed out, was it really discovery?
Yeah, but so what we should not do is discredit it as part of our history. You should not do that. So put it in the museum and put it in context. But do not have it in a park or in a public setting, which gives the impression that we say, oh, Christopher Columbus was a great man for Trinidad. No, it's not right. But put him in our museum because it is part of our history, is a part of who we are and why we are where we are today.
I think we need to understand slavery is just one example of it, but historically, humanity has done a lot of bad things to each other, right? So to judge everything by a modern lens is just not always practical. Now, slavery was very recent, but you can keep going back, and then what will be the point if you go back far enough? There'll be no end to it, right? So with regards to slavery, it's something that we could focus on that was recent, that was close enough to modern times, where you could still apply fairly some amount of modern thinking to it.
Because you're still suffering the consequences of
it.
That's what the point
loss
is.
Of culture, I think, is one of the most telling things.
And the dehumanizing.
Right, and the racism. But with regards to why did they celebrate Columbus, look, some things had to just catch up with rethinking it. So it is what
and
it is.
education of people, social media, a number of factors. It's all a matter of what is going on. You know, you have movements that go through periods. The French Revolution was an inspiration for the American Revolution. France donated the Statue of Liberty to the United States, and that is acted as an encouragement for them to fight for their liberty from England. So everything is a matter of context, time, things come at time, and you have to understand in 1956, what was Trinidad? How many people had a university education? How many people had a high school education?
How many people questioned the whole concept that he discovered?
Exactly, nobody, they didn't think, they didn't have that critical thinking. So you have to understand that nobody's saying that you should not have Christopher Columbus statue, but put him in the museum so we could see why he came, because he did come here, and it was the beginning of what we are today, that's for sure.
I mean, I'll say this, if there was no statue, I wouldn't say make a statue now, but I will say that we can't like erase him, as Karen said. So I do think the whole question about India is a bit trickier than reparations to slavery, but I will just say this. In World War II, Britain was outproducing, I believe, most other nations, except maybe America, but it might have been even, I think except maybe America, or maybe even it was outproducing America, because of the empire, not because of the British Isles.
The sun never sets
So that's just to kind of show you the scope of what it was. But look at that, cause and effect. Because of World War II, the empire was ended, right? Not saying that it was a good thing that it happened, but it happened, right?
You smiling when you say that, huh?
Because there's an irony there, but I mean, I don't have time to get into it because they're telling me to wrap up for the longest while. So I want to thank the callers. Yes, there are times when we're going to disagree. That's why we have this show, for more conversations, to ventilate it, right? And hopefully we will be able to enjoy the ideas coming together and seeing, you know, how things works out, and hopefully we could get better ideas born from that as we refine ourselves in the debate. Karen, thanks for joining me as always, and an interesting topic that is just one of those things where I'll be honest, I am of like multiple, I flip-flop on reparations all the time. I'll be honest, it's just one on various issues, right? Various points. It's just one of those things where I have not personally looked into it.
I wonder why.
So I feel like I don't have a personal stake in it, despite the fact that, hey, you know.
Yeah, okay. We don't say this.
I ain't gonna go any further, right? I mean, to some extent I should, but I don't. Right. So with that said, but I just hope that, all right, if we're serious about it, let's do and not just talk. And that's my fear, right? That's my fear, because Tobago autonomy looks more about talking than doing. Maybe that'll change very soon. But reparations, what about the do, right? Even if it's hard to calculate or it's not hard to calculate, the point is you have to start, do, right? And I'll leave that there. Let's not just have this topic of conversation for another 10 years, right? Without any progress. Stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Always, or never forget, it's nice to be nice. Even when the topics, we might have disagreements, because that's how we learn and grow, so that we could see each other with fresh perspectives tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-54